Have you ever stopped to think about how a tiny little strip of water, halfway across the world, can literally decide how much you pay for, well, pretty much everything? Gas, groceries, you name it. Let's trace that connection, because the answer shows just how tangled up our world economy really is.
So what would happen if one of the world's most critical arteries just stopped? Picture it. Giant tankers, just frozen in the water. Gas prices start to spike, and suddenly global supply chains just grind to a halt. All because of this one little choke point on a map. So why does this tiny place have so much power over all of us?
To really get a handle on its power, let's start with what happens when it all goes wrong. This is basically what a world on pause looks like, when a crisis in this one corridor creates a massive global traffic jam.
I want you to imagine, at any given moment, up to 250 massive ships just parked in the waters off the Persian Gulf. They're stuck, they're waiting, they're watching, and they're creating a logjam of unbelievable proportions in the world's most important shipping corridor.
And what are these ships carrying? Well, yeah, of course, there's crude oil and natural gas, but that's not all. You've also got container ships just loaded with the stuff of our daily lives, electronics, car parts, food, all sorts of consumer goods. These aren't just commodities, they're the actual building blocks of our modern world, just floating out there in limbo. So let's zoom in on the exact location at the heart of all this chaos. We're talking about the world's oil artery, the single choke point that holds the key to everything. And here it is, the Strait of Hormuz. It's this narrow passage of water that connects all the major oil producers in the Persian Gulf to, well, to the rest of us. You can think of it like the main exit door from a gigantic factory. If that one door gets blocked, absolutely nothing gets out. And here's the thing that's truly mind-boggling, the scale, or maybe the lack of it. At its narrowest point, the strait is only about 33 kilometers wide. And the shipping lanes themselves, they're even narrower, just a few kilometers across in each direction. It makes it an incredibly fragile and vulnerable spot. This number right here really drives home its importance. Every single day, nearly 1/5 of the entire planet's oil supply, that's around 20 million barrels, has to squeeze through this tiny passage. 1/5 of the world's daily energy. All of it depending on safe passage through this one spot. Now, the geography of the strait gives one country in particular a huge amount of influence. And that brings us to the geopolitical side of things, Iran's strategic control over this very choke point. See, Iran sits right on the northern shore, which means it practically controls the waterway. Its geography gives it this enormous strategic leverage. And here's the crucial part. Iran doesn't even need to do a full sustained blockade. Just the threat of a disruption, or even some partial interference, is enough to cause total chaos and send global markets into a complete panic. And that threat can get very real, very fast. This was an actual warning that was broadcast to ships in the area during a recent flare-up. You know, a message just like that is all it takes to bring maritime traffic to a screeching halt, because ship owners just aren't willing to risk their multi-million-dollar vessels and all that cargo. But, and this is a big but, a complete shutdown of the strait is usually seen as a last resort. So why is that? Because closing the route would also stop Iran's own oil exports, which would strangle a vital part of its own economy. It's an incredibly powerful lever, for sure, but it's one that comes at a really high cost for everyone, including them.
Okay, so now let's trace the fallout. We're going to look at how a disruption that seems localized in this one strait, well, it doesn't stay local for long. It sets off this powerful chain reaction that just ripples across the entire global economy.
It really works just like a row of dominoes. First, shipping either stops or has to be rerouted. That immediately makes the global oil and gas supply drop. Then, in response to all that risk, insurance costs for the ships just skyrocket. Of course, those higher costs get passed down the chain, and ultimately, it all fuels rising inflation that hits every single one of us. And to put a real number on that, before a crisis, insuring a big ship for just one trip might cost around $250,000. But when the risk goes up, that can jump to $375,000 or even more. That's a 50% increase for just one voyage. Now imagine that multiplied across hundreds of ships. So who feels this pinch the most? Well, a huge chunk of the oil passing through Hormuz is headed to Asia. In fact, almost 3/4 of it is destined for just 4 countries: China, India, Japan, and South Korea. Their entire economies are incredibly dependent on this one single vulnerable shipping lane staying open.
Okay, so we've seen the big picture, the ships that are stuck, the geopolitics, the market panic, but let's bring this all the way back home. how does a bottleneck thousands of miles away actually affect your bottom line?
Here it is. This is the most direct impact you'll feel. When the global oil supply gets tight, the price of crude oil shoots up, and that increase gets passed directly to you at the pump. A conflict in some narrow strait very quickly means you're paying more to fill up your car.
So, here's the crucial point. When shipping companies have to pay more for fuel and insurance, they don't just eat that cost. They pass it on to the traders, who then pass it to the distributors, who then pass it on to the retailers. So when all is said and done, who do you think ultimately pays for all of it?
You do. Every single time you buy food or electronics or gas, you're paying a tiny piece of that extra cost. It's this powerful reminder that in our interconnected world, a conflict a world away has a very real cost, right in your pocket. And it really makes you wonder, what other invisible threads connect your wallet to the rest of the globe?